Good evening. My name is Phil Schambra. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker, John Graf. John has a background in journalism, including a stint on the sports desk at the Janesville Gazette, and he's got a new book. He's the editor of a new book from the Society of American Baseball Research titled From Rube to Robinson, which chronicles the history of black baseball in the United States. And he's here to share some of that history with us. Would you please welcome John Graf.
Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that. Thanks to the Hedberg Library for its accommodations here tonight, and also for the display space elsewhere in the library. I don't know if you've seen the glass case and wall display in the fireplace room, but there are a number of Negro Leagues related items there, and I invite you to take a look at those and introduce yourself to some fascinating baseball history. Thanks to JATV for recording, and hello to viewers of this program on the internet. Here we are. Welcome, baseball fans. We're here to talk about the Negro Leagues, and the history of the Negro Leagues is one of both adversity and overcoming. As the head of the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum, Bob Kendrick, likes to say, I'm a member of the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR for short, and it has an active Negro Leagues committee. I was assisting in the annual conference that the Negro Leagues Committee puts on, and that unfortunately this last year was canceled because of the COVID epidemic. But in the process was in the right place at the right time to assist in selecting articles for the book that you see on the screen here and on the tables, and I appreciate your support in picking up a copy of it. I'll scratch the surface on a few topics, and we can talk about what you want to during the question and answer session. Again, if you don't have a card to write out a question, we've got cards so that I can understand your questions. My hearing is not the greatest, and so we'll see how we do in terms of understanding one another. It's safe to say that it's been a very monumental 2-year period or thereabouts in the baseball world. For starters, just in terms of how many of our childhood and adulthood heroes have passed away, it's a long list. A total of 115 former Major League players passed away in 2020, and over 70 so far this year. I don't know if that's an unusually high number, but I do know one thing. If you look at this list, Dick Allen, Lou Brock, Bob Gibson, Joe Morgan, Bob Watson, Jimmy Wynn, Henry Aaron, Mudcat Grant, and J.R. Richard have something in common. And that is that the color line would have barred them from playing what was considered by the baseball establishment to be Major League Baseball before 1947. There are some other noteworthy developments that have occurred in the last year and a half or so. The 100-year anniversary of the formation of the Negro National League was in 2020. The league was formed in 1920. The Negro Leagues also, between 1920 and 1948, have been designated by Major League Baseball as major leagues. The former editor of the Sporting News, J.G. Taylor Spink, had his name taken off of the Baseball Writers Association of America's award for distinguished sports writing because of his opposition to the integration of the major leagues. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis had his name taken off the Most Valuable Player Award in the last year or so. And again, that was a result of his history of having opposed integration. And of course, we had a baseball season that took place in shortened form due to the pandemic. So the book that we're talking about is From Rube to Robinson. And who is Rube? Well, he was the prime mover in the development of what, in the language of the time, was called the Negro National League. Not only that, he was an outstanding pitcher during the early 20th century, and a manager and a team owner, and the president of the first black league to last more than one season. Larry Lester's article in our book profiles him. Larry's an associate editor From Rube to Robinson, and also a Rube Foster biographer. That's Larry's book on Rube. And so that's the Rube of our title. And then there's Robinson. Of course, that's Jackie, shown here in the uniform of the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro National League in 1945, shortly before Branch Rickey signed him to a contract that broke the color line of the segregated majors. John Thorne and Jules Tigel are represented in the From Rube to Robinson book with their article on what was commonly understood to be the circumstances of Jackie Robinson's signing. And actually, the story is bigger than the conventional wisdom. The authors, and John Thorne is incidentally a Beloit College graduate and the official historian of Major League Baseball. He and Jules Tigel did some very interesting digging to get to the fuller story, which we deal with in depth in the book. There are also Wisconsin connections to black baseball history. I'll just mention a couple of them. Number one, in 1923, one of the teams in the Negro National League was the Milwaukee Bears. They were managed by a Hall of Famer, Pete Hill, who played during the early 20th century and managed the Milwaukee Bears in 1923. They didn't have such a good season. Their record was about 12 and 50 something. And so they only lasted part of one season. But that is Milwaukee and Wisconsin imprint on the history of black baseball. And in addition to the Bears, there's a Wisconsin connection to my favorite black player, the Hall of Famer Satchel Paige, who pitched for the Pittsburgh Crawfords, Kansas City Monarchs, many other teams, and of course he reached the major leagues with the Cleveland Indians in 1948. Black clubs also traveled to the smaller cities around the country, and you're in for a treat now. Some of you have seen this. The video footage you're about to see features Page in the village of Brooklyn, Wisconsin in about 1954 on Labor Day weekend. In Brooklyn, Wisconsin, Labor Day was a big deal for baseball, and they hosted a traveling team that Satchel Page played on. And so you'll see him warming up, scooping up some low throws. In addition to his pitching, he played first base during a lot of his barnstorming games. He'd play, or he would pitch maybe the first 3 innings or so, and then someone else would come into the game, but Satchel would play first base. And you can see as he scoops up a couple of low throws that he was a pretty proficient glove man. We'll also see him batting, running, his pitching motion, and then a pepper game involving his teammates. So here we go with Satchel Page in about 1954 or thereabouts. So he's just kind of warming up here. I need to credit Luke Johnson from Washington State, whose father took this video. Now you'll see him scoop up a couple of low throws in just a second. Brooklyn is near Evansville, if you didn't know. Now he cruises human. And as he's walking back to the bench, he's going to look for a bat. And, like a lot of pitchers, Satchel Page liked to talk about his hitting, and we'll see him take a couple of swings. In addition, he was renowned for his rules for living, which included avoid running at all times. But we have visual evidence that on occasion, Satchel did run. Oh, well, 1954, he was born in about 06, so he's in his late 40s. And here's his pitching motion. Again, yeah, good question, Tim. This is a 48 or thereabouts-year-old guy. And he was bringing it pretty well. A little pepper game among some of his teammates, and once again, you'll see at the end that once in a while, they drop the ball. But that's Satchel, and these are his rules for living, or how to stay young. Avoid fried meats which anger up the blood. If your stomach disputes you, pacify it with cool thoughts. Keep the juices flowing by jangling around gently as you move. Go very light on the vices, such as carrying on in society. The social ramble ain't restful. There's some question about how well he adhered to that. Avoid running at all times, and of course, don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. Now, Page's arrival in the major leagues with the Cleveland Indians, though, was not welcomed by the sporting news, which was considered the Bible of baseball. And in 1948, on July 14th, the paper editorialized about Page's arrival in the majors. And this is a quote from that editorial. In criticizing the acquisition of Satchel Page by Cleveland, the sporting news, which was edited by the aforementioned J.G. Taylor Spink, whose name was removed from the Writers' Career Excellence Award because of his opposition to integration. The Sporting News believes that Veeck, that's Bill Veeck, the owner of the Cleveland Indians, has gone too far in his quest of publicity, and he has done his league's position absolutely no good insofar as public reaction is concerned. To sign a hurler at Page's age is to demean the standards of baseball in the big circuits. Further complicating this situation is the suspicion that if Satchel were white, he would not have drawn a second thought from Veeck. To which Cleveland owner Bill Veeck responded, if Satchel were white, of course, he would have been in the majors 25 years earlier. And of course, the upshot is that Spink's name now is off of the Writers' Award. So things have come around to somewhat more tolerance in that regard. Now, Satchel also named some of his pitches. Some people say that he had more nicknames for his pitches than he actually had pitches, but there's some good ones here. Blooper, looper, drooper. A bow tie was a pitch that would brush the batter back from the plate if they were getting too close, and so the ball would be thrown up near the batter's neck. Also, the barber ball is similar. He's got the bat dodger. A nothing ball was like a changeup, a slow ball. And then all kinds of great names that you can see here. So in the book, we cover Satchel somewhat in an article by Jim Overmeyer titled Yankee Stadium, the House That Ruth Built, and Satchel Furnished with Fans. And it deals with the relationship of black baseball to Yankee Stadium as a renter And it goes back to 1930 when the first Negro League game played at Yankee Stadium was conducted as a benefit for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. So I'll give you a quick tour of the rest of the book. We've got a profile of a gentleman named Saul White, who was a player, manager, and writer during the early 20th century. That was written by my friend Jay Hurd. There are 2 articles and a poem on the great outfielder Oscar Charleston, including an article on the 1921 season that includes a sidebar by the late Dick Clark and John Holway about the early efforts to compile statistics in the 1970s and 1980s, efforts that have been ongoing since then and have resulted in a body of work that helped to prod Major League Baseball into taking a more favorable view of the Negro Leagues and elevating them to Major League status. There's a profile of, and the poem in the book is by a former Negro Leagues player and manager named Gentleman Dave Malarcher, who was from Chicago, and during the late 1970s, he was a member of SABR. And so he wrote a poem about Charleston that we published in the book. There's a profile of barnstorming legend John Donaldson and blackball in Minnesota. And that was written by a pair of historians, Steve Hoffbeck and Pete Gordon. There's an article on the 1887 attempt to start a black baseball league by Jerry Malloy, and Malloy passed away a number of years ago, but his name is on the Negro League's conference that SABR puts on every year. We'll see a slide later on that shows the Malloy conference announcement for next year. There's a survey by Todd Peterson, who is the author of a book called The Negro Leagues Were Major Leagues. And Todd's article in our book is coverage of the period of 1866 to 1923, when teams vied for championship bragging rights before there was a colored World Series. A few other articles, one on another stadium, Greenleaf Field in Pittsburgh, one of the few black-owned stadiums during the Negro League years. That story was written by Jerry Driscoll Strecker. The social and economic significance of black baseball in a typical city, a study of Kansas City by Japheth Knott. We've got an article by Brian Carroll on media coverage of black baseball and who during those years were considered the heroic figures of the Negro Leagues. And interestingly enough, in the early years of black baseball, it was the owners who were considered the high-profile and heroic figures of the leagues. The individual players didn't start to get covered as well until the days of Satchel Paige and some of his successors. And so Brian's article covers that subject. And then we also have an exhaustive study of the owners' meetings in black baseball from 1933 to 1962. And that was written by, from Rube Robinson's associate editor, Duke Goldman. And then last but not least, that brings us to what might be the most powerful article in the collection. It's titled, "Can You Read, Judge Landis?" And this article is Larry Lester's extensive study of the first commissioner's role in maintaining segregation in the white American and National Leagues. And so it raises the questions, was Landis an all-powerful baseball leader who could have turned the tide toward integration but didn't? Or was he just doing the bidding of owners who didn't want to integrate? So Larry Lester's article explores those questions. And Landis claimed that the owners could sign black players. Literal social movement developed, though, to challenge him to make good on that claim. And I hope you'll have a chance to read the article in our book about Landis, a former federal judge who had his name taken off the MVP award. I'll just give you an indication of what the thinking was among baseball establishment figures in the 1930s when players like Satchel Paige and Oscar Charleston, Josh Gibson, Norman Turkey Stearns were barred from playing in the white majors. The best were not allowed to play with the best. And so these are the words of sports writer Harold Speed Johnson, who compiled Who's Who in Major League Baseball in 1933. That's the title page of the 1933 volume. And there's a profile of Landis who is called the High Commissioner. It shows that it shows what the Negro Leagues were up against, this kind of thinking. And I'll read you a quote from Speed Johnson on Landis. Quote, "It was agreed that Judge Landis should be prevailed upon to accept the office of High Commissioner." This was in 1920 after the Blackstock scandal that Johnson is referring to. And then writing in 1933, "The manifold and exacting problems associated with that lofty station have ever since been handled by the former federal jurist in a manner most gratifying to," in Johnson's words, "everyone identified with the national pastime." Now, he obviously didn't consult any people from the black baseball community when he made that comment, and it illustrates the systemic exclusion of black players to the point of negating their very existence as being part of everyone identified with the national pastime, a literal denial of their humanity. And so to get close to wrapping things up here, I just wanted to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to introduce the book from Rube to Robinson, and wanted to let you know that the proceeds from sales of the book here tonight will be donated to the Society for American Baseball Research's annual Jerry Malloy and Negro League Conference, which will be held next year, hopefully, in Birmingham, Alabama, in a belated in-person celebration of the 100-year mark of the formation of the Negro National League. Also, I've got on the table and back a bibliography that consists of articles that were written by people who contributed to From Rube to Robinson. And it's quite a formidable list of works by some really high-powered baseball historians. I'm just proud to be associated with it. Now, if you're looking for a baseball road trip, I would recommend the Negro League's Baseball Museum in Kansas City. I've been there 3 times now, and it's a very, very educational experience. The displays include a timeline that connects the history of black baseball with the history of civil rights in the United States through the period of time that baseball has existed. So the mid-1800s through the present are covered there. It's a very interesting kind of connection to place baseball in the context of the larger historical occurrences that were going on at the time. And so, as I said, I've been there 3 times. There I am with my hero, Satchel Page. And just wanted to again thank the Hedberg Library, the people who were involved in putting together the displays that I hope you'll have a chance to take a look at. There are quite a few interesting items in those displays. There are jerseys, there are hats, baseball cards, posters, postcards, lots of books, and bobbleheads. You've got to have bobbleheads. And so I would like to also, in gratitude to the library's accommodations here and the generous offer of the display space, give to the library a couple of books that are, I hope, going to become part of the collection. One of them is The Negro Leagues Were the Major Leagues, and the other one is Negro Leaguers in the Hall of Fame. And so, Phil,
thanks, John. These will
Thank
make
you.
Great additions to the collection. I appreciate it.
Mhm. Okay, I guess we're ready for questions then. Mary will gather up the cards that you've got if there are some items that you wanted to ask about, or we can try it vocally. Yeah, Fran, let's see if I can hear you.
Yes, is one of the bobbleheads Rube?
No, I'm afraid it's not. The three bobbleheads are Henry Aaron, when he was with the Indianapolis Clowns in the early 1950s. Another one is Effa Manley, who is the only woman in the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. She was the owner of the Newark Eagles team in the Negro Leagues, and she is shown with a baseball cap and swinging a bat. And so Effa is the second bobblehead, and the third is an umpire named Bob Motley. And that's a really nice depiction of Bob Motley's showmanship as an umpire. The bobblehead simulates him jumping into the air to make a call, and I like that one a great deal. Yeah, Ted.
We know the players were segregated from the major leagues. What about the rest of the leagues, owners and league administration, coaches and managers, and the fans too? Were they primarily black or were they more mixed?
In the Negro Leagues, there was a mix. For instance, the Kansas City Monarchs were owned by a gentleman named J.L. Wilkinson, who is white. There were a couple of other white owners, but for the most part, ownership in the Negro Leagues consisted of black owners. In addition to Rube Foster, there was a contemporary of his named C.I. Taylor, who was the owner and manager of the Indianapolis ABCs. And Foster and Taylor engaged in debates about the need for black baseball to form itself into a league during the 19-teens. And their articles would show up in the newspapers of cities like Indianapolis and Chicago, where Foster was based with the Chicago American Giants. And Larry Lester's book, Rube Foster and His Time, describes those exchanges. And so C.I. Taylor was another owner of a black team. The Detroit Stars were owned by Tenny Blount, who is an African American as well. Let's see, who else? Well, later on in the 1930s, Gus Greene owned the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and Greenlee and another owner named Abe Manley had backgrounds in business, and their business included the numbers racket. And so some of the money that was used to form black baseball teams during the 1930s had this source that some people consider to be questionable. But Greenlee, in addition to that part of his background, was a very esteemed figure in the Pittsburgh black community. And so even though he was a numbers banker, he was a well-loved numbers banker. Yeah.
What about fans? Did everybody go to the games?
That I don't know quite as much about. I can tell you, though, that there are a number of stadiums in addition to Yankee Stadium that were venues that the Negro Leagues thrived in. The annual East-West All-Star Game was a major event in black baseball every year. It started in 1933. And it was held at Comiskey Park in Chicago. So it drew fans from the black and white communities and attracted crowds in the vicinity of from 20,000 to 50,000 people. And so the East-West All-Star Game was an event that was big in the black community and also included white spectators as well. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, John, was there any Negro League baseball played in the South?
In the South?
Yes.
Indeed there was. In fact, one of the 7 Negro Leagues that were designated by Major League Baseball as major leagues was the Negro Southern League in 1932. And among the teams that were in the Negro Southern League were Monroe, Louisiana. Elsewhere in black baseball history, there were the Birmingham Black Barons in the Negro National League, the Memphis Red Sox. There was a team in Jacksonville. There was a team in Chattanooga that gave Satchel Paige his start, the Chattanooga Black Lookouts. A number of other outposts in the South as well. Was there a particular thing you were getting at there? Or,
No, I just was curious. I didn't really know if it was accepted in the South to.
Yeah.
I had been reading a recent biography on Ernie Banks, and they talked a little bit about his experience playing in the Negro Leagues. He only played for a short time before he was brought up to the major leagues, but he talked about from town to town the acceptance level varied greatly in the Negro Leagues in the South, in which in some cases you were greeted at the outskirts of town with a police escort that brought you to where you were supposed to stay. You were told not to leave there until you went to the ballpark, and then they escorted you right out of town again. So there was hardly the greatest welcome you would get. Other communities were far more accepting.
Yeah.
But that biography of Banks is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Another aspect of that is that in addition to the teams that are considered major league teams among the black baseball squads are lower level semi-pro teams and so forth. For instance, the Milwaukee Bears, before and after they were in the Negro League under a couple of different names, were a formidable semi-pro team in Milwaukee. And so all over the country, that sort of thing occurred. In the early 20th century, late 19th century, Rube Foster played in Waco, Texas. And Texas was a location that produced a lot of formidable Negro Leagues players, including Ernie Banks.
Yeah, Ernie Banks actually played mostly fast-pitch softball, because that's what the kids played there. And he was first identified by a scout who watched him playing fast-pitch softball because of his fielding skills.
Mhm. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, we've got
It's
some.
from Tom. From Tom.
Okay, the question is, who do you think are the best players from the Negro League who never made it to the white major leagues? That's a really good question. The first person that comes to mind is a third baseman named Ray Dandridge. Ray Dandridge played for the Newark Eagles. He also played a great deal in Latin America, a lot in Mexico, and elsewhere as well. Ray Dandridge was a fabulous fielder. He was a solid hitter. He eventually signed a professional contract with the New York Giants organization in the National League. And it turned out that there was a quota system at work where the major league teams who were signing black players only signed a handful of them. And Dandridge was kind of the odd man out with the New York Giants, even though the Giants could have used a third baseman when he was playing in AAA with the Minneapolis Millers and hitting, astronomical batting averages. He was a 330, 340, 350 hitter. And the Giants never called him up. And so, he is the first person who comes to mind in that particular category. There are so many. I would call your attention to the display case where there are a number of postcards that were painted by an artist named Greg Kreindler. And he has done some really, really beautiful color studies of players whose photographs were just in black and white at the time. But a number of great players are depicted in that display. One of them is, and Oscar Charleston was a center fielder who some compared to Willie Mays in terms of his both hitting and fielding abilities. There was an outfielder named Rat Dixon who never made it to, he played in the 1920s and 30s, so he came before there was even a chance of black players getting into the major leagues. I've got to mention Norman Turkey Stearns. He was an outfielder with the Detroit Stars, and he is the home run king of Negro Leagues baseball. He hit more home runs in league play than Josh Gibson or another slugger from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, George Mule Suttles. But Turkey Stearns is somebody who's kind of close to my heart because I've met his daughters and also his granddaughter. They live in the Detroit area, and Stearns was a fabulous home run hitter, and he was a great family man. This Stearns' daughters, Roz and I've forgotten what the other daughter's name was, and now I'm going to be embarrassed when this goes on YouTube. Joyce and Roz. They sing the national anthem at Comerica Park in Detroit when the Negro Leagues have recognition days when the Tigers will dress in Negro League uniforms. There's a Detroit Stars jersey in the display case. But Roz and Joyce are just songbirds. They sing beautifully and are educators. They perform the national anthem and are just great people. I've met them a couple of times at these conferences. And Vanessa Ivy Rose is Turkey Stearns' granddaughter. And she has written some eloquent tributes to her grandfather, Grandpa Turkey, that you can find on baseballreference.com. And so, yeah, Turkey Stearns was another one. There are so many. I can't stress enough how enthused I am to invite you to explore further into these players. They were wronged. It's like if you lined up the white majors and the Negro League teams and were having a running race, and the starter's gun goes off, it's as though the white teams were uninhibited in heading toward the finish line. But the Negro League teams would have somebody who was trying to keep them from running at all. It's not like a straight shot to the finish line. It's like the Negro Leaguers had opposition, and there's no opposition in the Olympic 100-yard dash. But for the Negro Leagues who were trying to make a go of it under adverse circumstances, Major League Baseball literally destroyed the Negro Leagues. When they signed Jackie Robinson in the 1940s, Branch Rickey didn't compensate the Kansas City Monarchs for signing him. The Major League Baseball could have integrated differently, and the Negro Leagues could have survived, but it turned out that the white teams cherry-picked the best players from black baseball and absorbed them into the American and National Leagues, the white American and National Leagues. And the fan interest declined in Negro League baseball. The news coverage declined. And so black baseball eventually faded out. That period of time from 1920 to 1948 that is considered the Major League era for Negro League baseball was followed by some years when the Negro League still did exist. The Negro National League had two incarnations, the Rube Foster years in 1920 to the Great Depression, and then in 1933, the Negro National League revived and lasted until 1948. Then at the same time in the 30s, there was the Negro American League, and that survived after 1948 and into the 1950s. And so a number of the players from the 50s are still alive. And I mentioned the Malloy Conference, and that proceeds from the sale of the book are going to go to help some of these players who are still alive. They're in their 80s and 90s now, attend the conference. And it's just really a privilege to meet them. And they wound up as the surviving remnants of black baseball into the early 1960s. 1962 was the last year of the Negro American League. Yeah, Dave.
John, yesterday on the radio, you touched a little bit on Negro League baseball teams playing against actual Major League competition. And can you talk a little bit about the results and how that turned out?
Yes, and that's one of the important pieces of evidence that indicates that, as Todd Peterson's book that will become a part of the library collection indicates, the Negro Leagues were major leagues. And they played against each other a lot during the early 20th century. From the first years of the 20th century, about 1900 through 1950, there were some 600 games or more between Negro League teams and either intact Major League clubs in the early years or all-star teams from white baseball. And the one-loss record of the Negro Leagues in those matchups is pretty impressive. From 1900 to 1950, I think it's 315 victories for the Negro League teams, 280-some victories for the white teams, and 20 ties. And Todd Peterson's book goes into detail about how many actual Major League players were on these all-star teams, how many players were from, say, AAA or AA, how many were just semi-pro teams and so forth. And among the games that were played between Negro League teams and the white majors, or an all-star team that consisted of a significant number of Major League players, the Negro Leagues did very well, very well.
John,
Yeah,
this
Tim.
may be a more current question, but do you know much about the process and the background on the decisions to incorporate the statistics from the black major leagues into, the major league statistics? I mean, that must have been a pretty interesting conversation that went on. And how long did that go on, and who got involved, and all of that?
It is an interesting conversation, and there's been a long-standing effort by the seamheads.com website to compile a Negro Leagues database. And so they have, over the years, compiled stats from the Negro Leagues going way back to the early 20th century. And those stats have been incorporated now with the Major League Baseball designation into baseballreference.com. And if you look at baseballreference.com now, you'll see, for instance, with Satchel Paige, they'll show his Birmingham Black Barons Negro Leagues stats, his Cleveland statistics and St. Louis Browns when he was in the majors, his minor league stats. And so they're all in there. And thank goodness for current technology. You can get a line at the end of these year-by-year statistics that says how many career victories Satchel had in whatever level, the Negro Leagues or the Major Leagues or the minor leagues.
Sure.
There are some points of contention among baseball historians and current sports writers about just what should be happening with those numbers. And there are some who say that you shouldn't mix the statistics. I'm of the opinion that you should report every number. that it's significant at every level of play. The Negro Leagues games, the Major League games, and fans and historians are capable of sorting out the numbers. So I say report all of them and then sort it out. That's what baseball fans do. That's what baseball historians do. It's an ongoing project. And I think we'll hear more about it. I don't know if you're familiar with the sports writer Howard Bryant from ESPN, and he does a national public radio program as well. And Howard Bryant is very, very strongly saying that you don't mix those numbers. Josh Gibson never played in Major League Baseball. They didn't let him, so you don't have a statistics line that makes it seem as though Josh Gibson was a Major League player. Now, it becomes a matter of definition. I think Josh Gibson certainly was a Major League player. He had the talent, and the numbers are there, but they're different. A
The same
criticism.
way you can argue is that some of the greatest white players didn't have to face Satchel Paige in his prime.
Right. And the fact that the statistics for the recently completed season that took place in the pandemic meant that Major League Baseball had a season that was short, like the Negro League seasons were. They didn't play 162 game league schedules in the Negro Leagues. But if you can look at the 2020 season and see somebody who was a full-time player playing 60 games and figure out, well, okay, this is different. It's not less than. It's just what happened. And so again, I think that every number is significant, and it's up to us to interpret those numbers. Yeah, Dave.
John, do you think there was a genuine fear amongst some of the white players of the time that if they integrated, that they would be out of a job?
That was certainly the view of some players, and if you look at the history of Jackie Robinson's signing, there were stories that some of his teammates were upset about that. There's a finite number of open jobs in Major League Baseball, and so if you add one person, then somebody else is going to wind up out of a job, yes. One of the things that could have happened in integration, though, is that baseball could have adopted entire teams into the American National Leagues that were segregated. The black ownership could have survived had that happened, but that's not the way it worked out. Yeah. Again, citing Howard Bryant, he is of the opinion that the destruction of Negro League Baseball was exactly what the white baseball establishment had in mind when it started grabbing players, and the Negro Leagues declined as a result. Anybody else? These are good questions.
John, I've just got one more question. Sorry to take up so much of your time, but has there been much research done on doing this same type of thing with the Latino teams and the Asian teams?
There are historians who are specialists in those realms, definitely. You mean, like for instance, the Mexican League?
Yes, the Mexican League.
Considered a major league?
Yeah, and the Caribbean countries and all of that. Has there been much research into their histories?
That's something that's happening on an increased basis. The statistics are being added to all the time. There are historians who hunt for box scores of games that were played either in league competition or barnstorming games to just complete this history. And so for some historians, the history of the Mexican League or the Dominican League, Puerto Rico is another very prominent outpost for black players who wound up going from the United States to Latin American country. And they, for instance, Willie Wells, a famous shortstop who was elected to the Hall of Fame, said that his experience in Mexico was one of not experiencing the racism that he encountered in the United States. So there was this crossover between Negro Leagues players and the Latin American circuits. There are historians who are interested in that. The development of a statistical base is maybe not quite as advanced as the Negro Leagues researchers, but it is something that's happening. Okay, well, I think we've reached the bottom of the ninth inning. And, so I'd like to just thank you all for being here and for all your questions and your support. We're going to head over to the book sale and signing table. And once again, thank you so much for being here and for your interest in the complete story of baseball history.